Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the wildest, strangest, and most deeply buried facts about the characters who breathe life into the frozen province of Skyrim. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The Thalmor's hidden asset. Ulfric Stormcloak is one of the most recognizable figures in all of Skyrim, a barrel-chested man with a thunderous voice who commands the loyalty of thousands through sheer force of will and nationalistic fervor. But buried inside the Thalmor embassy, in documents most players rush right past, lies a truth about Ulfric that reshapes the entire civil war. When the Dragonborn infiltrates the embassy during the quest Diplomatic Immunity, a dossier on Ulfric Stormcloak can be found in the ambassador's office. That document details how Ulfric was captured during the Great War, and how Thalmor agents spent considerable time breaking him down and extracting information. More disturbing still, those same agents concluded that Ulfric had become, without his knowledge, a useful asset. A man whose rebellion was actively encouraged in secret by the Thalmor because a divided Skyrim is a weakened Skyrim. Ulfric has no idea. He believes every fiery word he shouts, but the elves he despises most may have built him into exactly what he is. The vampire in the throne room. Solitude is the most polished and prosperous city in all of Skyrim, a gleaming jewel of imperial authority perched on a great stone arch above the sea of ghosts. Jarl Elisif the Fair rules from the Blue Palace with all the poison grief of a young woman thrust into power by the murder of her husband, High King Torrig. But standing at her side, advising her on matters of magic and court policy, is a woman who has been alive since long before Elisif's grandparents were born. Sibyl Stentor, the court mage of Solitude, is a vampire. She has served Solitude's Jarls for over 20 years, long enough to have helped raise the late High King Torrig when he was a boy. And given that she hasn't aged a day in all that time, it stands to reason she was already a vampire well before she ever took the position. How long she has actually been alive is something the game never directly states, but based on her unnatural youthfulness and the whispered comments of the palace staff, it's implied to be considerably longer than her official tenure suggests. Her undead nature grants her an influence and cunning that no ordinary mage could match, but it also means that every smile she offers the young Jarl is the smile of someone who will outlive her by centuries. Elisif, to all appearances, has no idea what stands beside her throne. The spy in Lila's court. In Riften, a city perpetually soaked in the stench of crime and corruption, the Jarl herself is one of the few people who seems genuinely oblivious to how thoroughly she has been deceived. Layla Lawgiver governs the Rift with sincere intentions, but her steward, a woman named Anuriel, has been feeding information and loyalty not to the Jarl, but to Maven Blackbriar, the true power behind every deal in Riften. In Anuriel's personal chambers, letters from Maven can be found directing the steward on everything from suppressing Layla's political initiatives to smoothing over the public perception of Maven's own criminal enterprises. Most shockingly, one of those letters instructs Anuriel to assist in the imprisonment of Maven's own son, to prevent a legal situation from becoming an embarrassment. Anuriel serves her Jarl with all the performance of loyal service, and not 1 ounce of the reality. The rebel hidden in plain sight. Vignar Greymane is one of those Whiterun citizens who blends comfortably into the background. An old Nordic man who mutters about the old days and takes up a seat near the fire in the Bannered Mare. Beneath that harmless exterior, though, Vignar is deeply connected to the Stormcloak cause, and if the Stormcloaks take Whiterun, he becomes the new Jarl. What most players never discover is that the Greymane family and the Battleborn family have a feud so personal and so bitter that it has split the city down the middle for years, and Vignar was already identified by the Stormcloaks as their intended replacement Jarl should they take Whiterun. He is far from a passive observer. The comfortable elder image sits in interesting tension with the man beneath it, a former Imperial Legion commander who fought in the Great War, who turned against the Empire when the White Gold Concordat was signed, and who has been watching Whiterun's politics with the patience and precision of someone who has been playing a long game for a very long time. The Jarl who controls a terrorist, Thonar Silverblood, is the patriarch of Markarth's most powerful family, and the Silverblood name carries weight enough to make guards look the other way and judges reconsider verdicts. But Thonar's most dangerous secret is that he controls Madanach, the king in rags, the leader of the Forsworn, Skyrim's most feared insurgent movement, who sits rotting in Sidna Mine, the city's prison carved directly into the rock. Thonar uses Madanach as a precision weapon, occasionally allowing the Forsworn leader to issue orders that result in the deaths of Thonar's personal enemies. The arrangement gives Thonar a plausible deniability that money alone could never buy. Anyone who threatens Silverblood interest has a disturbing tendency to end up the target of a Forsworn assassination. The citizens of Markarth live in fear of the Forsworn, never realizing the man directing them lives in a grand estate in the city. The sadness beneath the Mead Hall. Vignar is not the only figure in Whiterun, hiding something significant beneath a calm surface. Jarl Balgruuf the Greater is widely regarded as one of the most fair and capable leaders in Skyrim, a man who values reason over rage. But in his personal quarters, in the letters and documents scattered across his desk, it becomes clear that Balgruuf is profoundly troubled by the Civil War and its effect on his city. He has a deep personal friendship with the Companions and a relationship of mutual respect with Farengar's secret fire, his court wizard, who he trusts far more than many give credit for. Farengar himself is worth noting. On the surface he seems dismissive and arrogant, but he has spent years quietly piecing together more knowledge about the dragon crisis than almost anyone else in Skyrim, driven purely by intellectual obsession. When the Dragonborn returns the Dragonstone to Dragon's Reach, Farengar's excitement is genuine, the delight of a scholar who has waited years for confirmation of something he suspected. The prisoner who refuses to break. Bear in mind that Sidna Mine is more than just a political tool for the Silverbloods. It is a place of genuine suffering, a prison with no official sentence length, where people are worked until they simply stop working. Inside the mine, Madanach, the king in rags, has spent over 20 years without seeing open sky. Despite this, he has organized the Forsworn prisoners into a functioning hierarchy, maintained loyalty among men who have every reason to despair, and kept himself politically relevant even from behind stone walls. He is, by any measure, one of the most formidable people in the entire game, not because of physical strength, but because of something far harder to contain. His patience is genuinely terrifying to consider, and when he is finally given a chance to act, he does so with 20 years of accumulated intention behind every decision. The secret letters of Whiterun's dark economy. Isolde is one of those characters that players dismiss entirely, a cheerful young woman who asks you to bring her a mammoth tusk so she can build connections with a Khajiit caravan. It seems innocent enough. She wants to buy the bannered mare one day and is building her merchant connections. But if you venture out into the wilderness southeast of White Run and find the camps around Sleeping Tree, a note can be discovered linking Isolde to a business arrangement involving Sleeping Tree sap, the active ingredient in a powerful hallucinogenic drug. Isolde is not just a hopeful innkeeper in training. She is operating as a link in an underground drug supply chain, using her legitimate merchant ambitions as comfortable cover for a much less wholesome side business. The mammoth tusk errand takes on a slightly different color once you know what the Khajiit connection was really for. The execution that haunts a family. When the Dragonborn first enters Solitude, they witness the public execution of a man named Rogvir, who is condemned for opening the city gates to allow Ulfric Stormcloak to escape after killing High King Torrig. It is a striking scene. A man walking to his death with his head held high, his niece Svari crying in the crowd, and a fishmonger named Advar doing his best to shield his daughter from the spectacle. Advar is Rogvir's brother-in-law. The weight of this is enormous. The execution is the result of a political decision made by a man acting on principle, and the cost is borne not just by him, but by every person in that family. There is a follow-up note later in the game where Advar, with unsettling coldness, thanks someone for killing a business rival. The grief and the gratitude exist in the same small man. The steward's perfect performance. Proventus Avenici is Balgrov's steward, a nervous imperial man who hovers at the edges of conversations and seems perpetually anxious about something. His relationship with his daughter Adrienne, the city's blacksmith, is strained. She views him as timid and overly cautious, constantly preventing Balgrov from taking decisive action when it matters most. What is remarkable about Proventus is how thoroughly his anxiety is justified. He is one of the few characters in Whiterun who genuinely understands how precarious the city's neutral stance is, and his caution is not cowardice, but a realistic assessment of what another siege would do to a city that has barely recovered from its last one. He is perhaps the most politically honest person in Dragon's Reach, even if his manner of expressing that honesty sounds like someone who needs a very long rest. The most dangerous gatekeeper, Arngir, the speaker for the Greybeards at High Hrothgar, is voiced by actor Christopher Plummer, best known for films like Knives Out, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and The Sound of Music. That alone would be notable. But Arngir carries additional layers of weight. He himself explains that the other Greybeards are too powerful to speak safely, and that he serves as their translator because the Thuum of his brothers would cause structural damage to High Hrothgar itself with casual conversation. Interestingly, Ulfric Stormcloak, who trained at High Hrothgar, describes Arngir as the eldest and most powerful of the Greybeards, which sits in interesting tension with Arngir's own self-deprecating account. Whether his modesty is genuine or a philosophical posture is something the game leaves productively unresolved. What is not in doubt is his level in the game, which sits at a staggering 150, the highest of any humanoid NPC in all of Skyrim. Whatever his place in the Greybeard hierarchy, the Mountain has decided he is not to be trifled with. The Greybeard, who cannot speak freely. Borri and Wulfgar, two of the other Greybeards at High Hrothgar, have mastered the voice to such a degree that casual speech risks unintended destruction. Every word they utter carries the weight and force of the Thuum behind it. This is why Arngir, despite being the least powerful among them, does almost all of the speaking. His mastery is sufficient to communicate without accidentally bringing stone down on someone's head. The idea that restraint, quiet, and stillness are the true tests of power in this monastic order shapes everything about High Hrothgar as a location. The mountain is silent not because nothing is happening there, but because what is happening there requires silence. The monastery is a pressure vessel, and the 4 men inside it are very carefully managing how much they release at any given time. The Jarl who sleeps in a dead city, Corir, the Jarl of Winterhold, rules over what is by any measure the most devastated settlement in all of Skyrim. The Great Collapse, a catastrophic event a century before the events of the game, reduced what was once the greatest city in the province to a few scattered buildings clinging to the edge of a cliff. Corir is a bitter, suspicious man who blames the College of Winterhold for the destruction, and while the connection between the college's magical experiments and the collapse is never fully confirmed, his bitterness is not entirely without basis. He is a Jarl presiding over rubble, surrounded by citizens who number in the single digits, trying to govern a hold that has never recovered, and may never fully do so. The contrast between his formal title and the hollow reality of his court is one of the quieter tragedies in the game. The housecarl who guards an empty throne. Calder is the housecarl assigned to Yerim, the purchasable home in Windhelm. He is stoic, dutiful, and speaks in the clipped tones of a man raised to serve without complaint. But Windhelm under Ulfric Stormcloak has a darker edge than most of Skyrim's cities. It is a place where Dunmer are forced to live in the Grey Quarter, and Argonians are not even allowed inside the walls. Calder serves loyally within a system he has never questioned. When you purchase Yerim, which was the scene of a brutal series of murders carried out by Calixto Corium in his attempt to resurrect his dead sister, Calder becomes your housecarl without any acknowledgement of the horrors that happened in the very rooms he now patrols. His calm is the calm of someone who has either decided not to know or simply never asked. The innkeeper, who isn't an innkeeper. Delphine runs the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood, with what appears to be the weary competence of a woman who has spent too many years serving mead to travellers who never tip well enough. She complains to her barkeep Orgnar about the ale going sour, occasionally nags him about stock, and treats the whole business of innkeeping with the resigned air of someone managing a situation rather than enjoying it, which is because she is. Delphine is one of only 2 remaining members of the Blades in all of Skyrim, a secret order sworn to protect the Dragonborn that has been hunted nearly to extinction by the Thalmor. The inn is not her life. It is her cover. Every year she has spent cutting ale with water and listening to Orgnar's monosyllabic responses has been a year spent waiting for the Dragonborn to appear. She is voiced by actress Joan Allen, lending her a quality of controlled, simmering intensity that never quite breaks the surface of her innkeeper mask. The Dark Brotherhood's many faces. The child who cannot age. Babette is, on the surface, a 10-year-old girl in a tattered dress who sits in the corner of the Dark Brotherhood's Falkreath sanctuary, speaking in a child's lilting cadence about potions and contracts. But Babette is 300 years old. She was bitten by a vampire at the age of 10 and has spent 3 centuries trapped in a child's body while the world aged around her. What makes Babette remarkable beyond her impossible lifespan is how precisely she has weaponized her appearance. She describes in cheerful detail how her targets never see her coming, how the sweet, innocent child earns trust that no adult ever could, and how that trust becomes the last thing they ever misplace. She is the master alchemy trainer for the Brotherhood, the oldest member of the Falkreath Sanctuary, and arguably the most dangerous person in any room she enters, simply because no one looks twice. The jester's real grief. Cicero is introduced as an irritant. A cap and bells lunatic dancing and giggling by a broken wagon on the road to Whiterun, transporting an oversized coffin and asking strangers to intercede with a suspicious farmer named Laureus on his behalf. The performance is so thoroughly eccentric that most players immediately categorize him as comic relief. But the journals Cicero has kept over the years, found scattered in the Dawnstar Sanctuary, tell a different and much sadder story. Cicero was a skilled and respected assassin long before his descent into apparent madness. His task as keeper of the Night Mother, guarding and transporting her sacred coffin, became increasingly isolating as the Brotherhood collapsed around him and sanctuaries went dark one by one. He watched everything he belonged to disintegrate with only a silent corpse for company. His madness, if it is madness, is the product of years of complete and total loneliness. The jester's bells ring over something that might, in another life, have been profound grief. The leader who burned it down. Astrid is the woman who built a family out of assassins, and she is one of the most psychologically complex characters in the game. She joined the Brotherhood as a young woman after killing an uncle who made unwanted advances, an act she describes not with regret, but with satisfaction. She rose through the ranks, married Arnbjorn, and eventually became the sanctuary leader, casting aside the old tenets of the Brotherhood in favor of running it like a tight professional operation. Her fatal flaw is that she mistakes control for strength, and when the Night Mother's arrival threatens her authority, she makes a decision that gets most of her family killed. What is devastating about Astrid's ending is that she knows exactly what she has done. She begs the Dragonborn to perform the Black Sacrament on her, to kill her with her own blade, as an act of contrition, acknowledging that she violated everything the Brotherhood stood for. Her last words are a confession, not an excuse. The werewolf husband. Arnbjorn is Astrid's husband, and one of the more quietly interesting background characters in the Brotherhood. He is a former companion, one of the Circle members who accepted lycanthropy as part of Skyrim's most famous warrior guild, who was expelled from the Companions for unspecified but clearly serious misconduct. He ended up in the Dark Brotherhood, where his aggression and bluntness are assets rather than liabilities. He is initially hostile to the Dragonborn, viewing any new recruit with suspicion that reads as territorial rather than personal. But as time passes and the Brotherhood's bonds tighten, Arnbjorn softens just enough to reveal something underneath the surliness. A man who is loyal in the bone-deep, uncomplicated way that only people who have lost everything else can be. His marriage to Astrid is one of the most functional relationships in the game, which says something interesting about the Brotherhood's internal culture. The scholar who chose darkness. Festus Krex was, before his time with the Brotherhood, a member of the College of Winterhold. He left because he believed the college fundamentally misunderstood how destruction magic worked, and this is not merely professional frustration. It reads as the kind of intellectual grievance that calcifies into identity over years. He is the oldest human member of the Falkreath Sanctuary's Brotherhood, and he brings to assassination the same pedantic thoroughness he once applied to magical research. His dialogue is full of dry academic observations delivered with the relish of a man who has given up entirely on being understood and now simply enjoys being correct. When he dies during the Penitus Oculatus raid on the Sanctuary, his death is the loss of someone who found in murder the rigorous intellectual discipline that academic life failed to provide him. The Argonian Shadow Scale. Vizara is a member of the Dark Brotherhood with a background unique among his fellow assassins. He is an Argonian shadow scale, a member of a secretive order that trains young Argonians born under the sign of the shadow to become assassins in service to the Dark Brotherhood from birth. The shadow scale program has largely been dismantled by the time the events of Skyrim unfold, and Vizara is one of its last living graduates. This makes him a relic of an older, more structured brotherhood, someone who represents what the organization was before Astrid began reshaping it in her own image. He is polite, soft-spoken, and clearly skilled, but there is something melancholy about his presence in the Falkreath Sanctuary, as though he is aware that the tradition that made him has been quietly discontinued behind his back. The Night Mother's long wait. The Night Mother is not precisely an NPC in the conventional sense. She is a voice, a corpse in a velvet-lined coffin, the spiritual and organizational heart of the Dark Brotherhood for centuries. Her body was brought to the Falkreath Sanctuary by Cicero after every other sanctuary in Tamriel had been destroyed. She had been without a listener, the one person able to hear her voice, for a very long time. The depth of loneliness implied by this situation is considerable. The Night Mother is a goddess figure, worshipped and feared, and she waited in silence through the Brotherhood's collapse, through the Great War, through Cicero's deteriorating mental state, for someone to arrive who could finally hear her again. When she speaks to the dragonborn inside her coffin, it is the first real conversation she has had in an indeterminate, but clearly very long time. The assassin who can't be killed by children's rules. Babette cannot be killed during the destruction of the Dark Brotherhood, even if the player chooses that questline. Children in Skyrim are protected by a blanket mechanical invincibility, and Babette, despite being 300 years old, counts as a child for purposes of this protection. This creates a darkly comedic situation where the most experienced assassin in the Dark Brotherhood's surviving roster cannot be touched by any conventional means, while her older colleagues are cut down one by one. Babette is also one of only 2 Dark Brotherhood members who survives regardless of which path the player takes, the other being Nazir. That an immortal vampire child and a sardonic Alikar warrior are the final inheritors of the oldest assassin guild in Tamriel is either deeply appropriate or deeply absurd, and the game itself seems aware of both possibilities. The empty chair at every meal. The Night Mother's presence in the Falkreath Sanctuary creates a peculiar social dynamic. She sits in her coffin in a side chamber, attended by Cicero, while the rest of the Brotherhood goes about its business just a few feet away. There are members who revere her. Festus and Gabriella consider their loyalty to the Night Mother primary, above even Astrid. There are those who are indifferent, and there are those, like Arnbjorn, who find the whole arrangement unsettling, but tolerate it for Astrid's sake. The Brotherhood in Skyrim is, at its core, a study in how institutions fracture when their founding principles are abandoned, and individuals try to fill that void with personal loyalty instead. Astrid substituted herself for doctrine, and the sanctuary held together on the strength of her personality alone, which made the Brotherhood incredibly effective and catastrophically fragile at the same time. The Dark Brotherhood's legal problem, something players rarely think about, is that the Dark Brotherhood's location in Falkreath Hold is not exactly a secret to the local authorities. The guards in Falkreath seem to be aware in a general way that something unusual is going on in the forest. The Brotherhood maintains a kind of tacit agreement with the surrounding communities. They don't cause problems locally, and local officials decline to look too closely at certain doors in the hillside. This arrangement is informal and entirely dependent on the Brotherhood maintaining discipline. When Cicero begins causing problems and the internal tensions of the sanctuary start leaking outward, it is a sign of institutional instability that the local truce begins to feel fragile. The Brotherhood's survival has always depended as much on discretion as on skill, and Astrid's sanctuary was managing both, until it wasn't. The contract that changed history, the assassination of Emperor Titus Mede II, is the culmination of the Dark Brotherhood questline, and it is presented as the kind of contract the Brotherhood has not taken since the assassination of Pelagius. Astrid herself marvels at the ambition of it, but what the player eventually discovers is that the contract was not placed by an enemy of the Empire in the conventional sense. It was placed by Amon Motiere, a member of the Elder Council, as part of a succession maneuver within the imperial government itself. The assassination of the Emperor was an inside job, politically speaking, orchestrated not by rebels or revolutionaries, but by the very apparatus that was supposed to protect him. The Brotherhood, in this instance, was not an agent of chaos. It was a precision instrument used by the establishment against itself. The Keeper's broken wagon. When Cicero is encountered on the road near Lorius Farm, his situation is deceptively mundane. A broken wheel, a stubborn farmer, a man in a jester's outfit asking for help. But the subtext of that encounter is considerable. Cicero has been traveling alone across Skyrim carrying the Night Mother's remains, trying to find a sanctuary that would take him in, having been turned away from or unable to reach any of the Brotherhood's other locations. The broken wagon at Lorius Farm is not just a plot inconvenience. It is the last obstacle before Cicero reaches the only surviving sanctuary in all of Tamriel. He is exhausted, isolated, and increasingly unhinged, and the farmer's suspicion of him, which is objectively reasonable given the bizarre spectacle Cicero presents, represents one more piece of ordinary human obstruction, standing between him and the only home he has left, the Dunmer Archer's silent expertise. Gabriella is the Dark Brotherhood's expert in archery and assassination from range, and she operates with a calm precision that contrasts sharply with Cicero's chaos and Festus's sardonic commentary. Her loyalty to the Night Mother above Astrid places her in an interesting position of quiet political alignment within the sanctuary's internal dynamics. She keeps a frostbite spider named Lise as a pet, and the juxtaposition of a gentle spider owner and a professional killer is very characteristic of how the Brotherhood presents itself. Dangerous people who have simply built a home together. Gabriella is the source of a contract involving a wedding assassination in solitude, and the specific mechanics of that quest, which encourage the player to time the kill for maximum public spectacle, reveals something about how the Brotherhood thinks about its work, as performance as much as function. The ghost who speaks for the dead. After the Falkreath Sanctuary is destroyed, the Dragonborn receives the power to summon a spectral assassin, specifically the ghost of Lucien Lechance, a legendary member of the Brotherhood from the events of the Elder Scrolls IV, Oblivion. Lechance was a key figure in that game's Dark Brotherhood questline, and his reappearance here as a summoned spirit creates a connection across the decades of in-game history. What is notable is that Lechance's ghost is fully voiced and characterful, offering commentary on the player's actions with the dry authority of someone who has seen everything the Brotherhood has ever been and still finds it impressive. He is, in a sense, the institutional memory of the Dark Brotherhood made manifest, a reminder that the organization is older than any of its current members, and will probably outlast all of them. The Brotherhood's true 5 tenets, the 5 tenets of the Dark Brotherhood, the rules that govern conduct within the guild, are written out in tomes placed throughout the Falkreath Sanctuary, but those tomes are so weathered and worn as to be nearly illegible in-game. This is not accidental. Astrid has deliberately allowed the tenets to fade because she has replaced them with her own brand of authority. The tenets, at their core, prohibit things like killing fellow Brotherhood members and revealing the Brotherhood's existence to outsiders. Astrid's violation of the tenet against betraying brothers to an outsider, her deal with Commander Morrow, is what triggers the wrath of Sithis and leads to the Sanctuary's destruction. The faded tomes are a visual metaphor for exactly what Astrid did to the Brotherhood's soul, and the game places them there for anyone patient enough to notice. The companions and the circle's burden, the price of becoming. Kodlak. Whitemane is the harbinger of the companions, and he is dying slowly of lycanthropy, not from the beast blood itself, which keeps him physically alive, but from the spiritual consequences he has come to believe it carries. Kodlak is haunted by the fear that when he dies, rather than joining his ancestors in Sovngarde, he will be taken to Hircine's hunting grounds, the afterlife reserved for werewolves. This is not a fear born of weakness, but of genuine faith, and it shapes every conversation with Kodlak in a quietly aching way. He is a powerful man, approaching the end of his life, who cannot find peace in the thing that has defined his Brotherhood for generations, his quest to cure himself before he dies, and the Dragonborn's role in completing that journey after his murder is one of the more emotionally resonant threads in the game's faction storylines. The Circle's secret, the inner circle of the companions, Skjor, Alla, Vilkas, Farkas, and ultimately the Dragonborn, are the only members of the organization who know that the companions have carried a secret for centuries. All Circle members are werewolves. The rank and file companions in Whiterun's Jorvaska are entirely unaware of this, which means that dozens of warriors eating and training and sleeping together in that mead hall are blissfully ignorant of the nature of their most senior colleagues. The Circle keeps the secret not from shame, but from a practical understanding that the revelation would splinter the organization irreparably. Some of those ordinary companions would be delighted, others would be furious. The whole careful arrangement is another example of how almost every institution in Skyrim is held together by a combination of genuine loyalty and very deliberate selective ignorance. The silver-blooded feud. Ayla the Huntress has a particular intensity around the Silver Hand, the group of werewolf hunters who war with the companions, that goes beyond mere guild loyalty. When Skjor is killed by the Silver Hand, Ayla's response is not grief in the conventional sense, but a kind of cold, consuming fury that she acts on immediately and with absolute conviction. She and the Dragonborn launch a series of retaliatory raids that are fueled more by Ayla's personal need for vengeance than any strategic calculation. What she never quite says directly, though the weight of her grief and the personal nature of her fury strongly imply it, is that her relationship with Skjor was something deeper than colleague or comrade. The Silver Hand did not just kill a fellow companion, and her response is shaped entirely by what seems to be a loss far more intimate than professional loyalty, even if she never gives it a name. The brother who thinks slowly. Farkas is, by his own admission, not the thinker of the two brothers in the companions. That role belongs to Vilkas, who is sharp-tongued, intellectually proud, and somewhat contemptuous of people he considers simple. Farkas knows he is not as clever as his brother, and has made a kind of peace with this, that is both disarming and quietly profound. He's the gentlest fighter in Joravaska, the one most likely to stop mid-conversation to make sure you understood what he just said, the one who responds to the Dragonborn's kindness with genuine warmth, rather than Nordic stoicism. What makes Farkas interesting is that his simplicity is not stupidity. It is a complete absence of guile. In a city and a faction full of secrets and careful performances, Farkas is exactly what he presents himself as, and in Skyrim, that is genuinely unusual. The Scholar Warrior's resentment. Vilkas is the other half of that fraternal equation, and he is far less comfortable with his own nature than Farkas. His lycanthropy sits uneasily with him. He was educated enough to question it, proud enough to resent what it implies about his choices, and stubborn enough never to fully admit this to anyone. He trains the Dragonborn in two-handed combat with a kind of demanding professionalism. But the longer you speak to him, the more apparent it becomes that Vilkas has a great deal of internal conflict about being a companion at all. He believes in the organization's ideals while being uncomfortable with the secret it carries. He admires Kodlak's desire for a cure, while being uncertain about his own willingness to seek one. Vilkas is a man at war with himself in a way that would be paralyzing if not for the fact that he can point that energy outward with a greatsword, the huntress who won't stop hunting. Even after the companion's questline is complete and Kodlak's spirit is freed, Ayla continues to offer the Dragonborn the option to contract lycanthropy, and she continues to run missions against the Silver Hand as if the vendetta never ends. This is not a mechanical oversight. It reflects something true about Ayla's character. She is not a person who resolves things, she manages them. The Silver Hand will always have more members, and she will always have more fire to spend on them. She is the companion most deeply at home with the beast blood, the one most resistant to the idea of a cure, and the one for whom the hunt, actual literal hunting, is not a metaphor, but the entire point of being alive. Ayla is, in the fullest sense, exactly what the companions claim to be on the surface. The Whispering Augur. Buried deep within the College of Winterhold, in a flooded chamber beneath the Midden, exists a presence known as the Augur of Dunlane, a former student who pushed his magical experimentation so far beyond acceptable limits that his physical form dissolved entirely into pure magical energy. He is now a voice in the dark and a swirling light surrounded by rising water, and he speaks in riddles and observations that suggest a mind that has lost the human scaffolding, but retains some residue of its former self. What is haunting about the Augur is that he is clearly not malevolent. He is simply no longer capable of existing the way people exist. He helps the Dragonborn because whatever humanity remains in him is still oriented toward assistance, but his help comes through a veil of abstraction that suggests the person he was is very far away indeed. The Harbinger's unfinished business. When Kodlak is killed by the Silver Hand during the quest Glory of the Dead, the companions perform his funeral at his pyre outside Whiterun. But the story does not end at the pyre. It continues to Ysgramor's tomb, where the Dragonborn fights through an ancient burial site to reach a witch's head, use it to cleanse the beast blood from Kodlak's soul, and finally release him into Sovngarde. The detail that the Dragonborn performs this task for a man already dead, that the funeral was not the end, but a beginning of something else, gives the companion's questline its emotional weight. Kodlak asked for peace he could not secure in life, and the organization he built rallied to give it to him posthumously. There is something about that gesture, about going to a cold tomb for someone who cannot know you are doing it, that is one of the quieter acts of grace in the game. The former mage among warriors, Yorland Greymane, is the master blacksmith of Whiterun, and his forge, the Skyforge, positioned above Jorvaska beside the Gildergreen, is considered the finest in all of Skyrim. Weapons made on the Skyforge carry a subtle quality that regular smithing cannot replicate. What fewer players notice is that Yorland is not merely a craftsman. He is a man of deep personal conviction, caught between loyalty to his family's Stormcloak sympathies and his ties to the Companions, who maintain strict neutrality in the Civil War. He handles his family's political arguments with the quiet resignation of someone who has decided that love and neutrality are not incompatible. But he has clearly thought about this more than anyone who watches him hammer at the forge would guess. The Headless Horseman's real purpose. The Headless Horseman who gallops across Skyrim's roads after midnight is one of the game's most beloved ambient details. A ghost on a ghost horse, riding in eternal silence toward a destination he never reaches. He cannot be spoken to, and he carries no conventional lore explanation attached to a quest or a journal. But he always rides toward Hamvir's Rest, a small Nordic burial mound in the hills of Whiterun. Hold. If you follow him there, he vanishes at the edge of the graveyard. Whether he is the spirit of a restless warrior, unable to find burial, a guardian of the site, or simply a detail Bethesda placed to make the nights feel genuinely eerie, is never clarified. His silence is the whole point. He is a question the game refuses to answer, which means he has lived rent-free in the imagination of every Skyrim player for over a decade. The College of Winterhold's hidden tragedies. The Archmage's terrible secret. Salvos Aren is the Archmage of the College of Winterhold when the Dragonborn arrives, and he presents himself with the calm authority of a man who has earned his position through decades of scholarly dedication. But the Dragonborn eventually discovers, during the college questline, that Savos has a secret he has been carrying so long, it has changed the shape of who he is. Years before the events of the game, as a young student, Savos and 5 companions, Atma, Hafnar, Icefist, Takes in Light, Elverly Veren, and Gerduin, explored the ruins of Labyrinthian in search of power and magical knowledge. One by one, his companions fell, and Savos chose to use the last 2 survivors, Atma and Hafnar, as living magical anchors, trapping their spirits to contain the ancient dragon priest Moroke, rather than facing him directly. Those 2 spirits are still in Labyrinthian when the Dragonborn arrives, still holding the door, still aware enough to speak. Savos built his distinguished career on the imprisonment of people he once called friends, and he never told anyone. The Thalmor spy at the college. Ancano is introduced as the Thalmor's representative at the college, officially described as an advisor. The college, which values knowledge above almost everything else, tolerates his presence with the strained politeness of people who know they are being watched and have decided the political cost of objecting is too high. Ancano is deeply unpleasant in the specific way of someone whose arrogance is backed by genuine institutional power. His goal at the college is to gain access to and weaponize the Eye of Magnus, an ancient artifact of immense magical power, for the Thalmor's purposes. He very nearly succeeds. What makes Ancano interesting is that his contempt for the college is entirely genuine. He does not pretend to respect the mages he surveys. He considers them instruments, and he makes very little effort to disguise this. His downfall is that he is so accustomed to Thalmor authority that he underestimates what happens when scholars decide to fight back. The Khajiit who wants to be the best. Jazago is the most entertainingly arrogant character at the College of Winterhold, a Khajiit apprentice with absolute confidence in his own abilities and no particular interest in modesty about it. He is the only follower in the game who has no level cap. He continues to grow stronger indefinitely as the player levels up, making him mechanically one of the most powerful followers available. Chisago is also the source of one of the college's funnier secondary quests, involving experimental scrolls that are supposed to damage undead, but have a tendency to also severely damage the living person holding them. He asks the Dragonborn to test them without mentioning this detail. When the Dragonborn survives, Chisago is impressed in the particular way of someone who expected success and views their own prediction as the most notable part of the outcome. The novice whose experiments go wrong. Arniel Gain is a researcher at the college whose questline involves the reproduction of the Dwemer's ancient teleportation experiments. Specifically, the catastrophic one that caused the disappearance of the entire Dwemer race from Tamriel in a single moment thousands of years ago. Arniel has collected all the necessary components, performed all the required steps, and is convinced he understands the process he is replicating. The Dragonborn eventually delivers a warped soul gem to him during this questline, and in a subsequent visit, Arniel himself vanishes in exactly the way the Dwemer vanished, leaving no trace except a shimmering ghost that can occasionally be summoned afterward. Whether Arniel succeeded, failed, or accidentally joined the Dwemer in whatever plane of existence they occupy is never clarified. His disappearance is small-scale and largely unnoticed by the college. The Dwemer's was not. The master who teaches alone. Tolfdir is the master-level trainer for alteration magic at the College of Winterhold, and he is, in temperament, the opposite of almost everyone else there. He is patient, gentle, almost comically careful, the kind of teacher who suggests protective wards before every exercise and cautions students against rushing, when rushing is usually exactly what a dangerous magical situation requires. He is the first instructor the Dragonborn meets at the college, leading a lesson on warding spells that is interrupted by a vision of the Eye of Magnus. Tolfdir's response to this extraordinary event, a magical phenomenon appearing unbidden in the middle of a routine tutorial, is to treat it with careful, measured curiosity rather than alarm. He is the college's institutional calm in human form, and his survival of the Eye of Magnus crisis is not incidental. People like Tolfdir rarely die heroically. They survive by being the most consistently sensible person in the room. The librarian who loathes you. Urag Groshub is the orc librarian of the Arcanium, the college's vast library, and his attitude toward any student touching his books without permission is best described as barely contained fury. He will loan books, but watches the transaction with the expression of a man watching his children handed to strangers. What is interesting about Urag is that beneath the hostility is a genuine intellectual passion. He has spent his career assembling one of the most comprehensive libraries in Tamriel, and his protectiveness is not arbitrary, but the result of understanding exactly how difficult it is to preserve knowledge when wars and catastrophes keep happening to destroy it. Urag grew up as an orc in a society that historically undervalued scholarly pursuits, and he has built his identity around the books he was supposed not to care about. The hostility is a shell around something much less aggressive, the ghost of someone else's mistake. Mirabelle Irvine is the master wizard of the college, and, for all practical purposes, its operational head. Savos Aaron is the archmage in title, but it is Mirabelle who keeps the institution functioning. She is composed, capable, and quietly exhausted by the combination of managing a building full of unpredictable mages and quietly managing Savos's growing anxiety about the Eye of Magnus. She is also, somewhat heartbreakingly, one of the characters who dies during the college questline's climax, caught in the surge of power that Ancano unleashes from the Eye. She does not die saving anyone in a heroic gesture. She dies because she was in the wrong place when someone else's power play exploded. It is one of the more honest deaths in the game. Not a sacrifice, just a consequence. The student who worships incorrectly. Onmund is a Nord apprentice at the college, who is one of the few Nords in all of Skyrim to have chosen the study of magic over the warrior's path. And he is quietly aware that this choice has placed him at odds with his family, his culture, and the assumptions most Nords make about what a Nord should be. His backstory involves a family that traded a personal heirloom with Enthir, the college's black market contact, in order to help Onmund afford his studies, and the questline around recovering it is a quiet character study about the cost of choosing a path that no one around you was expecting you to choose. Onmund is one of those NPCs who illustrate something true about Skyrim's world, that the cultural boxes it draws for its people are rigid enough that choosing differently comes with very real costs. The Thieves Guild's long shadows, the guild master who became the crime. Mercer Frey is the guild master of the Thieves Guild when the Dragonborn joins, and he is presented initially as a competent, experienced leader whose cold pragmatism is simply the realistic edge of a criminal organization. The questline gradually reveals something more disturbing. Mercer stole the skeleton key, a divine artifact belonging to Nocturnal that can bypass any lock in existence, from the Twilight Sepulchre, and used it to drain the guild's resources. When Gallus, the previous guildmaster, grew suspicious and began closing in on the truth, Mercer murdered him and framed Carlia, Gallus's partner, for the killing. He then spent decades keeping Carlia hunted and discredited. Mercer has been wearing the guild's authority like a coat, while systematically dismantling the organization from within. And the thing that makes him effective as a villain is that his real power was never the skeleton key. It was the trust people placed in the title Guildmaster. The woman who waited 25 years. Carlia is one of the most patient characters in Skyrim, and patience here means something specific and harrowing. She has spent 25 years in exile, hunted by the Thieves Guild she once belonged to, knowing that the man who murdered the person she loved is leading that very guild, and being unable to prove it. She spent those years not in bitterness or paralysis, but in preparation, studying Gallus's encrypted journal, researching Mercer's methods, waiting for someone trustworthy to appear who could be shown the truth. The Dragonborn is that person, and when Carlia finally acts, she acts decisively and precisely, without hesitation or wasted motion. 25 years of waiting distilled into a plan that works. Her character rewards close attention because her restraint is not passivity. It is the most dangerous thing about her. The Nightingale Pact, the Nightingales, Gallus, Carlia, and Mercer made a pact with Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Darkness, trading service in life for service in death. When a nightingale dies, their soul is bound to the Twilight Sepulchre, Nocturnal's shrine, as an eternal guardian. Gallus is already there. Mercer's soul, had he managed to absorb enough power from the skeleton key, might have escaped that fate. Part of what made his plan so audacious was that it was not just theft, but a bid for freedom from a divine agreement he had decided he no longer wanted to honor. This context makes the Nightingale questline more than a story about a guild rivalry. It is a story about what it means to make a promise to something that cannot forget, and what happens to a person who decides that the promise was never actually binding. The woman with no name, Sapphire, one of the Thieves' Guild members who frequents the Ragged Flagon in Riften, is one of the more quietly affecting peripheral characters in the game. Her actual name is never given. She chose the name Sapphire herself, and in the base game, what happened to her family is implied only through her terse responses and the barely disguised wariness with which she treats everyone who approaches her. The Dragonborn add-on reveals, in a surprisingly poignant side moment, that Sapphire has a living father, Glover Mallory, a blacksmith in Raven Rock on Solstheim, who's been searching for her for years without knowing if she survived the attack on their farm. The reunion is never guaranteed by the game. There is only the possibility of it, carried in a letter, waiting for someone to decide whether to deliver it. The fence who builds the network. Delvin Mallory is the man who gives the Dragonborn jobs in the Ragged Flagon, and who, quietly and without fanfare, is the reason the guild has any infrastructure at all during its decline. He runs the special operations jobs that restore the guild's influence in Skyrim's major cities, and he does this with the weary professionalism of someone who has been keeping this organization breathing through sheer organizational willpower while everything else decays. Delvin is also Sapphire's uncle, though she is reluctant to acknowledge family connections in a profession where personal ties are liabilities. He is loyal, decent in the complicated way that criminals can be decent, and fundamentally a builder. Someone whose gifts are infrastructural rather than dramatic, and who rarely gets credit for the fact that without him, the Thieves' Guild collapses long before the Dragonborn arrives. Dragons, greybeards, and ancient voices, the dragon whose name is a confession. Parthenax's name, translated from the dragon language, means ambition overlord cruelty. He was named at his creation, as all dragons were, and the name is not an aspiration or a title, but a description, a statement of what he was made to be. That he has spent thousands of years at the peak of a mountain, choosing silence over the domination his very name demands, is what Parthenax considers his greatest accomplishment. He does not claim to have transcended his nature. He claims to have resisted it, one day at a time, for millennia. When he asks the Dragonborn whether it is better to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort, it is a genuinely philosophical question coming from the mouth of a being who has spent longer than all of human history making that effort. The name he was given and the life he chose exist in permanent tension. The Dragon War's forgotten traitors. Parthenax was not the only dragon to betray Alduin during the Dragon War. A small number of other Dov sided with mankind, and it was the combined effort of these dragon defectors and the ancient Nord heroes that turned the tide of a war that had been going badly for mortals for generations. But the names of these dragon defectors are mostly lost. Parthenax survived because he allied himself most visibly with the Greybeards and buried himself in meditation. The others did not fare as well, hunted down by both sides in the aftermath of the war. They represent a chapter of history that neither the dragon factions nor the human factions had much incentive to preserve. Their sacrifice, which was in many ways greater than Parthenax's because it cost them everything, is honored in essentially no monument or text. The voice that could break a mountain. Jurgen Windcaller, the founder of the Greybeards and the originator of the Way of the Voice, was originally a general and war shout practitioner who used the Thu'um as a weapon in the Skyrim of the First Era. After a military catastrophe in which he and his forces were defeated despite their use of the voice, Windcaller spent 30 years in solitary contemplation trying to understand why the gods would allow those who wielded the gift of the voice to lose. His conclusion was that using the Thu'um as a weapon was a misuse of a divine gift, and that the only correct use was contemplation and reverence. He founded High Hrothgar on this principle, and the Greybeards have kept to it ever since. This is the philosophical framework that places Arngir and the Dragonborn in direct conflict. The Greybeards believe the voice should not be used as a weapon, and the Dragonborn's entire function is to do exactly that. The dragon who visits prisoners. Paarthurnax has a small personal detail buried in his dialogue that most players miss entirely. He recalls visiting Numinex, the dragon imprisoned in Dragon's Reach in Whiterun during the First Era. Numinex was captured by the ancient Nord hero Olaf One-Eye through a trial of the voice and placed in the great cage still visible above Dragon's Reach's Great Hall. Paarthurnax visited him, a voluntary, quiet act of contact between one dragon and another during a period when dragons were being hunted to extinction. He recalls that Numinex had been imprisoned so long, with so little intellectual stimulation, that he could no longer remember his own name. Paarthurnax's grief over this, mentioned in passing in a conversation most players skip, says more about his character than almost any of his philosophical speeches. The Elder Scroll at the End of the World. Esbern, the only surviving senior blade aside from Delphine, has spent years hiding in a squalid room in Riften's Ratway, surrounded by notes and obsessively cataloguing every piece of prophetic text he can find about the return of Alduin. He is the scholar in hiding, the person who understood what the dragon crisis meant long before anyone else was willing to believe it. What makes Esbern compelling is that his knowledge is entirely genuine and entirely useless in isolation. He can tell you exactly what is happening in historical and prophetic terms, but he has no way to act on that knowledge without someone to work with. The Dragonborn's arrival at his hiding place is the first time in years that the information he has been hoarding has a practical application. His relief is palpable, and it is the relief of a man who was right about something terrible and could not make anyone listen until now. The Dragon Who Calls You, by title. Alduin, the World Eater, is the firstborn of Akatosh and the most powerful dragon in existence, and he is a genuinely fascinating antagonist in part because of how he relates to the Dragonborn specifically. He does not despise the Dragonborn. He views them as an aberration, an error, something that should not exist. His contempt is the contempt of something that considers itself above the rules, having to acknowledge that the rules have found a way to apply. He feeds on the souls of the dead in Sovngarde to restore his power. And when the Dragonborn and the ancient Nord heroes face him in Sovngarde's misty meadows, what they are doing is not just slaying a dragon. They are ending the interruption of every afterlife in Tamriel. Sovngarde has been shrouded in Alduin's mist, full of souls he was eating before they could pass on, for long enough that the dead are lost in it. The dragon who chooses submission. After the Dragonborn uses the shout Odarviing to summon and trap the dragon in Dragon's Reach, Odarviing makes a calculation. He can be trapped indefinitely, or he can cooperate with the being who just demonstrated the ability to summon him by name. His cooperation is entirely pragmatic. He acknowledges the Dragonborn's power in the matter-of-fact way of a dragon confronting a hierarchy, and once that acknowledgement is made, his assistance is genuine. He becomes, in effect, a voluntary ally, and there is something interesting about a creature of pure pride deciding that serving a stronger force is not beneath its dignity, but simply the appropriate response to a demonstrated reality. This is Alduin's weakness made explicit. He cannot accept the idea of someone stronger, and Odahviing can. And that difference in adaptability is part of why Alduin loses. Followers, warriors, and housecarls, the Shield Maiden, who is always there. Lydia is the first housecarl most Skyrim players ever receive, assigned upon becoming Thane of Whiterun, with the words, "I am sworn to carry your burdens," a phrase that has become one of gaming's most beloved passive-aggressive declarations of service. What players rarely linger on is what Lydia's life actually consists of. She stands in Breezeholm waiting for the Dragonborn to return, with no routine beyond that vigil. When she is not needed, she simply exists in that house, in that exact spot, indefinitely. She is a professional soldier reduced to purely domestic function, and the famous flatness of her line readings may be not a voice acting limitation, but the perfectly accurate emotional register of someone who has been assigned to stand and wait for a person who might not come back for very long stretches. The old warrior with the new code. Vilkas trains the Dragonborn in two-handed combat, but it is his brother Farkas who takes them through the first real companion's quest. A dungeon crawl that ends with Farkas revealing his werewolf nature to protect the Dragonborn from a silver hand attack. He transforms without hesitation and without asking permission, and afterward explains himself simply. He was not trying to hide it. He was just waiting for the moment when showing it was the right choice. It is one of the few moments in Skyrim's NPC roster where a character demonstrates genuine situational judgment rather than following a script, and it makes the Circle's secret feel less like a burden Farkas carries and more like a tool he simply knows when to deploy. The Dawnguard Commander. Isran, the leader of the Dawnguard, is a man whose entire identity is built around a cause that most of Skyrim considers marginal to the point of irrelevancy. He founded the Dawnguard specifically to combat the vampire threat, spending years preparing for something that everyone else insisted was not a real problem. When Harkon's vampires begin their campaign and the threat becomes undeniable, Isran has the deeply conflicted satisfaction of a person who was right about something no one wanted to believe. He is harsh, demanding, and prone to dramatic speeches. But beneath the severity is a man who genuinely understands the danger better than anyone alive, and who has sacrificed personal comfort and relationships for decades on the strength of that understanding. His distrust of Serana is therefore not cruelty. It is entirely consistent with his life's work. The ancient vampire's daughter. Serana is one of the most beloved followers in Skyrim's history, and her popularity rests on a quality that is rare in NPC companions. She feels like a person rather than a service. She has opinions, history, discomfort, and a sense of humor that surfaces in dry asides during the most inappropriate moments. She grew up in Volkihar Castle as the daughter of Lord Harkon and Lady Valerica, spending her childhood largely alone, reading books and learning alchemy from her mother in the castle gardens. When her father's plans for the tyranny of the sun reached a point that terrified even her mother, Serana agreed to be sealed away with one of the 3 Elder Scrolls needed to complete the prophecy, sacrificing centuries of her own life to prevent it. She spent an indeterminate number of years in that crypt, and when the Dragonborn finds her, she has no idea how much time has passed. The father she outgrew. Lord Harkon is Serana's father, and what makes him a compelling antagonist is that he genuinely loves her in his way, and that love and his obsession with the tyranny of the sun have become so tangled that he cannot distinguish between them. He gave Serana the gift of pure vampirism, transforming her into one of the most powerful vampires in existence because he wanted to give her power. He cannot understand why she resists him. He cannot understand why she sides with the Dragonborn. He interprets her autonomy as betrayal because, in his cosmology, love and obedience are synonymous. His death at the end of the Dawnguard questline can be carried out by Serana herself if the Dragonborn allows it, and the option exists to let her do it. Whether she chooses to is one of those quiet player decisions that the game builds toward without ever explicitly resolving. The Vigilant who never should have survived. Isran and the Dawnguard have a specific reason to remember Keeper Karset, the woman who led the vigilance of Stendar at the Hall of the Vigilance before a vampire raid killed her and most of her colleagues early in the Dawnguard questline. Karset was a restoration trainer, capable of teaching the Dragonborn if they reached her in time. But the window is extremely narrow. Unless the player heads directly for the Hall of the Vigilance before triggering the vampiric escalation of the Dawnguard storyline, she will already be dead by the time they arrive. The hall is a ruin. Most players never meet her alive. She is, in a sense, a reminder that Skyrim's world keeps moving whether the Dragonborn is paying attention to it or not, and some of the most interesting doors close quietly and irreversibly while you are looking elsewhere. The mercenary with sentimental scars. Janassa is a Dunmer mercenary who can be hired from the drunken huntsman in Whiterun, and her hiring speech is a brisk declaration that she likes killing and finds it more enjoyable than most legitimate professions. She is blunt, competent, and has clearly decided that performing genuine warmth for strangers is not worth the effort. But her background, glimpsed through careful listening, suggests a story that involves displacement and loss. She is, after all, a Dunmer far from Morrowind, in a province that does not particularly welcome her people, doing work that requires no cultural belonging at all. The efficiency is a wall. Most players never bother to knock on it. The housecarl who reads, Jordis the Sword, Maiden, is the housecarl assigned to Proudspire Manor in Solitude, and she has a detail that distinguishes her from many other housecarls. She is literate and interested in ideas, and it is possible to hear her making observations about Solitude's political situation with more sophistication than the average warrior. She is young, eager in the way of someone newly assigned to a prestigious position, and occasionally betrays that she finds the domestic parts of housecarl duty less thrilling than the combat parts. Her enthusiasm is both endearing and a reminder that the title of housecarl represents real prestige in Nordic culture. Being assigned to a thane is not a punishment, but an honor, and Jordis knows it. Merchants, civilians, and the lives they lead. The Forger's quiet competition. Adrienne Avenici is the blacksmith who runs War Maidens at Whiterun's gate, and her name suggests a Breton heritage in a very Nordic city. She is the daughter of Proventus Avenici, Balgruf's steward, and the relationship between them is defined by a kind of affectionate frustration. She finds him overly cautious and wishes he would stop smoothing over situations that need confronting. Adrienne herself is direct, capable, and mildly competitive with Yorland Greymane up on the Skyforge. She knows his work is better than hers, and she knows why. And she has made a professional peace with it while still maintaining what is clearly a healthy degree of professional envy. She is one of those NPCs who exist to sell you iron and hide, but has just enough character around the edges to feel like someone who had a life before you walked up to her. The innkeeper who knows everything. Hulda, the proprietress of the Bannered, Mare in Whiterun, functions as the information clearinghouse for the whole city. Inns in Skyrim are designed narratively as the places where rumors travel, and Hulda embodies this. She knows about the thieves, the feuds, the political shifts, and the small scandals that keep Whiterun's social life turning. She is also the person who will point the Dragonborn toward various adventure hooks simply by existing and being willing to talk. What makes her interesting is that she runs this information operation while managing the actual logistics of a busy inn. Supplies, staff, sleeping arrangements, the demands of a resident bard named Mikael, who has more confidence in his musical ability than his romantic advances warrant. She is essentially a small-scale administrator of the social world, and she performs this role entirely without drama. The bard who can't take a hint. Mikael is the bard at the Bannered Mare, and he has made the mistake of repeatedly pursuing Carlotta Valentia, the vegetable seller in Whiterun's market, despite her very clear and repeated disinterest. Carlotta, a single mother raising her daughter Mila, has asked him to stop and has been ignored. There is a minor quest in which the Dragonborn can intervene on her behalf, confronting Mikael and either intimidating or persuading him into dropping the pursuit. The satisfaction players report from this quest is disproportionate to its mechanical simplicity. It exists entirely as a quiet act of standing up for someone who has been unable to make herself heard. Carlotta's relief is palpable and genuine, and Mila comments afterward with the open admiration of a child who watched an adult do something actually useful. The hidden drug dealer, Drífa, who works at her husband's shop in Windhelm, presents as an ordinary merchant's wife. But underneath her bed, a stash of skooma can be found, and conversations with her husband reveal a man who has noticed suspicious discrepancies in the shop's accounts without quite being willing to name what he suspects. Drífa is apparently embezzling from the shop to fund a skooma addiction, conducting this double life in one of the most conservative and culturally rigid cities in Skyrim, surrounded by people who would be appalled. The smallness of this secret, not a political conspiracy or a supernatural horror, but just a person struggling with something she cannot control and cannot admit, is one of the things that make Skyrim feel like a real place, rather than just a stage. The merchant who thanked the wrong person, Advar, the fishmonger in Solitude, is connected by marriage to Rogvir, the man executed at the city gates at the start of the game. He spends considerable effort shielding his daughter Svari from witnessing the execution, which establishes him immediately as a man whose primary concern is his child's emotional well-being. The secondary note, discoverable later, in which he thanks someone for killing a competing market vendor, recontextualizes his gentle father image in a way the game never quite addresses. He grieved his brother-in-law and shielded his daughter from violence while simultaneously being willing to express gratitude for a commercial rival's death. People are rarely one thing, and Advar's small contradictions are the game quietly insisting on this. The pawnbroker who sees everything. Belethor runs the general goods store in Whiterun, and he is one of those NPCs whose dialogue has achieved genuine mimetic status. His most famous line, offering to sell you his sister if I had one, is delivered with the cheerful lack of shame of a man who has decided that absolutely everything is a transaction and there is no point in pretending otherwise. But Belethor's personality is not just comic relief. He is one of the few merchants in Whiterun who is openly cynical about the city's politics, the guild system, and the pretensions of his neighbors, and his willingness to say things other characters carefully don't say occasionally illuminates things the game's more earnest NPCs paper over. He is, in the most literal sense, the man in Whiterun's market who will deal in things other people pretend don't exist. The potion seller's professional pride. Arcadia, who runs Arcadia's Cauldron in Whiterun, is an imperial alchemist, operating in a city that mostly wants steel and arrows. She has carved out a successful business in a culturally unappreciative environment by being simply very good at what she does, and marketing herself as the only serious alchemist for miles in any direction. Her rivalry with Farangar, who orders from her regularly despite pretending the shop is beneath his academic dignity, is a small comedy of professional relationships, and she is one of the few characters who manages to seem genuinely busy in a way that Skyrim's NPC routine system usually only approximates. She is also involved peripherally in a quiet subplot involving Whiterun's criminal connections through her legitimate supply chain. Those touched by Daedra, madness, and fate, the Mad God's chosen tourist, Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, appears in Skyrim's Daedric quest. The mind of a madman, as a remarkably well-dressed man, enjoying a pleasant afternoon tea in the mind of a catatonic emperor. The emperor in question is Pelagius III, one of history's most memorably unhinged rulers, and his mental landscape is a surreal environment in which furniture attacks people and a fork and a knife are conducting a disagreement of existential proportion. What makes this encounter extraordinary, beyond the tea and the apparent delight Sheogorath takes in it, is the identity the prince seems to carry. This Sheogorath speaks in passing references and carries an insider's ease with events from the Oblivion Crisis that, if taken at face value, could suggest he is the hero of Kvatch from Oblivion. The player character who became Sheogorath at the end of that game's Shivering Isles expansion. Bethesda has never confirmed this outright, and given the nature of Sheogorath as a Daedric prince who exists outside ordinary time and continuity, certainty may not be the point. The implication is there for anyone paying attention, and Sheogorath, appropriately, has never cleared it up. The vampire whose love destroyed a village. Alva is a vampire operating in the small town of Morthal, and her scheme is one of Skyrim's more disturbing local horrors. She has hypnotized a man named Hrogar into burning down his own house, killing his wife and daughter, by convincing him that she is his new love, a compulsion so thorough that Hrogar genuinely believes it, and defends her to anyone who questions the arrangement. The true mastermind is Movarth, an ancient vampire whose plan is to take over Morthal progressively, seducing the guards, converting key citizens, building a network of thralls, and turning the town into a feeding ground. The Jarl of Morthal, Idgrod the Younger, suspects something but cannot act without evidence. In her chambers, Alva keeps letters from Movarth, detailing the plan in methodical, patient terms. It is not a scheme built on violence. It is a scheme built on gentleness, and it is somehow more frightening for it. The Cannibal's Ring. The quest Namira's Dinner Party is Skyrim's most deeply unsettling quest line for a very specific reason. It does not require violence. It requires the player to participate willingly in something monstrous in order to gain a favor from Namira, the Daedric Prince of Revulsion and the Ancient Dark. The cannibal cult the Dragonborn joins meets in a hidden chamber beneath Markarth's Hall of the Dead, led by a cheerful priest named Eola, who speaks about human flesh with the casual enthusiasm of someone discussing a favorite recipe. She is one of the most effective horror NOIP PCs in the game because she is absolutely sincere. There is no performative menace, no theatrics, just someone with genuinely different values inviting you to share a meal. The horror is not in what she is, but in how comfortable she is being it. the collector who lost his mind and found purpose. Calixto Corium runs a museum in Windhelm, a small collection of historical oddities that he has assembled and annotated with the meticulous care of a man with too much time and too much grief. He is the Windhelm Butcher, the killer responsible for the murders of young women that the Dragonborn investigates during the Blood on the Ice questline. What drives him is not sadism in the conventional sense, but something closer to obsession. His sister Lucilla died, and he has convinced himself that the necromancer's amulet he is assembling from harvested body parts will restore her. His museum is, in retrospect, a monument to a grief that has curdled into something catastrophic. Every object he shows visitors with polite narration is displayed by the same hands that were doing something else entirely at night. The Wolf Queen's ghost, Potema Septim, known as the Wolf Queen of Solitude, is a historical figure from Skyrim's deep lore, an empress-in-waiting who plunged Tamriel into a civil war known as the War of the Red Diamond in the late Second Era, through sheer ambition and the willingness to raise the dead in her service. By the time of Skyrim's events, she has been dead for centuries, but during the quest line given by the Court of Solitude, the Dragonborn discovers that a necromantic cult has been attempting to resurrect Potema and has come close enough that her spirit is actively manifesting and causing problems. When you finally confront her in her catacomb beneath Solitude, she is still entirely herself. Imperious, contemptuous, and genuinely terrifying in the way of someone who was formidable in life and has had centuries of death to refine what remains. Her defeat requires the combined effort of the Dragonborn and a senior priest of Arche, the dwarf who isn't. Calcelmo, the court wizard of Markarth, is a high elf scholar so deeply invested in Dwemer research that his entire identity has become indistinguishable from the subject he studies. He has spent years excavating in Chuanzel, the Dwemer ruin beneath Markarth, and he guards access to his work with the ferocity of an academic who knows that publication is the difference between legacy and irrelevance. His relationship with his nephew Ikantar is one of those comedic side details that rewards attention. Ikantar is manifestly embarrassed by his uncle's obsessions and is visibly counting down to a career change. Calcelmo is also one of the few characters who makes genuine intellectual progress during the game's events. His Dwemer linguistic work forms the basis for the Thieves Guild's translation of Gallus's journal, directly impacting the main Thieves Guild questline without him ever knowing it. The priestess who lives in nightmares. Dawnstar is a town in perpetual distress when the Dragonborn arrives. Its citizens are all experiencing terrible nightmares that prevent them from sleeping. The cause is Vermina, the Daedric Prince of Nightmares, whose shrine Nightcaller Temple stands in the hills above the town. A priest named Erendor has been living in the temple, attempting to atone for a past in which he served Vermina willingly, and the questline around him involves both clearing the temple and deciding whether to trust someone whose history makes trust complicated. Erendor is one of the more quietly complex potential followers in the game, someone whose desire for redemption seems genuine and whose competence is evident, but whose background creates a tension that the questline never fully resolves for either the Dragonborn or the player. The Witch Who Sees the Future. Olava the Feeble is a beggar woman in Whiterun, the sort of character most players walk past without registering. She appears unremarkable, elderly, hunched, operating at the very edge of the city's social structure. But she is a witch, and if the Dragonborn completes the Thieves Guild questline under specific conditions involving an achievement called Breaker of Rings, she offers them a reading of their fortune, which provides a specific location of a unique item in an unmarked location. the fortune-telling is real in a mechanical sense, it leads somewhere. What makes Olava interesting is that her power is not presented dramatically or magically. She sits in the street and begs and sees things. The ordinary surface is the whole disguise. The innkeeper who forgets nothing. Klepper runs the Silverblood Inn in Markarth, and his domestic situation is one of the game's most amusingly specific background details. He and his wife Frabby conduct their marriage as an extended public argument, the terms of which have long since ceased to be about anything either of them can clearly articulate. They bicker at each other in the shared space of the inn with the fluency of people who have been having the same argument for decades. Their children and staff have adapted to this as the baseline ambient condition of working at the Silverblood Inn. Klepper, if you talk to him, will comment on his marriage with a rueful self-awareness that suggests he knows the situation is absurd and has simply decided that the alternative, change, is more effort than the bickering. He is, in this small way, deeply human. The museum curator, who accidentally helps, Silas Vesuvius, runs a museum in Dawnstar dedicated to the mythic Dawn, the cult responsible for assassinating Emperor Uriel Septim at the beginning of Oblivion and opening the gates of Oblivion across Cyrodiil. He is cheerful about his subject matter in a way that makes visiting the museum a peculiar experience. He has collected Mythic Dawn artifacts and memorabilia with the enthusiasm of a hobbyist entirely unconcerned with the moral implications of what he is enthusiastic about. His quest involves the reconstruction of Mehrunes' razor, a powerful Daedric artifact, and ends with the Daedric Prince Mehrunes Dagon himself, arriving to destroy the worshippers who just reassembled his weapon. Silas intended to preserve history. He accidentally recreated the conditions for a Daedric assassination. These are not always different things. Hidden figures and the loose ends of the world, the mage who solved the Dwemer question. Arniel Gain's disappearance, discussed earlier in the context of the college questline, has a specific and important implication that most players miss. The Dwemer vanished simultaneously across all of Tamriel during the Battle of Red Mountain in the First Era, in an event so total and so instantaneous that it defies any conventional historical explanation. Every adult Dwemer, not just those at Red Mountain, but those thousands of miles away, vanished in the same moment. The nature of their disappearance has been the Gita's central unsolved mystery of Elder Scrolls scholarship for the entire franchise. Arniel, by apparently doing to himself exactly what was done to the Dwemer, may have answered the question, or become another data point in a mystery that was never meant to be solved, just contemplated. His ghost, which can be summoned after his disappearance, has nothing useful to say about it. The Oracle of the Blue Palace, Sibyl Stentor's status as a vampire in Solitude's court, carries implications that radiate outward into the history of the city. She has served at least 2 generations of Jarls. She is confirmed to have served Toryg's father Istlod before Toryg himself, and she helped raise Toryg from a young age. That institutional knowledge of Solitude's politics would be staggering even for a mortal courtier. For someone whose vampirism has extended her life well beyond what she acknowledges, it would be something else entirely. But more interesting is the question of what she knows, that she has not shared. She has watched every decision of every court she has served, with the detachment of someone who will be there after all the current players are gone. Her loyalty to Elisif seems genuine, or at least functionally indistinguishable from genuine. But the loyalty of someone who outlives everyone they are loyal to accumulates a kind of emotional weight that is entirely different from ordinary devotion. Sibyl has buried more friends than most people have met. The Innkeeper's Resistance. Orgner, Delphine's barkeep at the Sleeping Giant Inn, is one of Skyrim's most perfect background characters. He does exactly one thing well. He tends bar and responds to everything else with a single syllable. Delphine's elaborate intelligence-gathering operation is conducted directly above and around him, and he appears to be entirely unaware of it or simply uninterested. When Delphine gives him instructions, he acknowledges them minimally and acts on them when he feels like it. When she is not present, he tends bar and responds to travelers with the absolute minimum conversational investment required to complete a transaction. If he suspects anything unusual about his employer, he has decided this is none of his business. Orgner is a masterclass in the presentation of a man who has concluded that curiosity is not worth its overhead costs. The Missing Blacksmith's Son. Rustleaf is the blacksmith in Dawnstar, and he is one of the NPCs affected by the nightmare plague afflicting the town. But beyond this, he has a personal story that involves his wife Seren, a native of Hammerfell who came north specifically to be with him, building a life in a harsh, cold city, far from the desert landscapes of her homeland. The detail of their marriage, a cultural distance so significant it runs through their daily interactions, her adaptation to the cold, his quiet pride in having something worth adapting to, is present in fragments scattered through their dialogue. It is one of those relationship portraits that exists entirely in the background of a city's nightmare crisis, adding texture to a world that keeps containing lives the main quest has no time for. The man who became a god, Talos, or Tiber Septim as he was known in life, is the most politically charged figure in Skyrim's lore. He was a mortal who conquered the world, became emperor, and upon his death was apotheosized into the divine pantheon as the ninth divinity. Worship of Talos has been outlawed by the White Gold Concordat between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, making even quiet prayer an act of political resistance in Imperial-held territory. Every NPC who carries a Talos amulet or whispers a prayer in the streets is making a choice that could cost them their freedom. The war's ideological heart, the thing that gives Ulfric's rebellion genuine moral weight beyond mere nationalism, is the belief that a man who lived, breathed, loved and died deserves to be remembered honestly. The Thalmor's objection to Talos worship is not theological, but strategic. A god who was human suggests that humans can become gods, which challenges everything the elves believe about the natural order. The innkeeper who knew too much. Branche is not precisely an innkeeper, but he is a figure in Riften whose story cuts in an interesting direction. He is a Dunmer merchant who sells goods in the Riften market, and he has been quietly searching for the truth about his origins. He was found as an infant and does not know who his parents were or where he came from. The Thieves' Guild questline's opening mission in Riften involves the Dragonborn being asked by Brynjolf to plant stolen goods on Branche, resulting in his imprisonment, simply to create a distraction. The Dragonborn never learns why Branche specifically was chosen as the fall guy. The answer, buried in guild lore, is that Branche had been asking questions that were inconvenient for someone with connections to the guild. The search for his own identity was threatening enough to someone, somewhere, that they paid to have him silenced. The Dwemer's final answer, Septimus Cygnus, is possibly the loneliest person in all of Skyrim. He is a scholar who has dedicated his life to understanding the Elder Scrolls, the divine artifacts capable of recording and altering the nature of reality, to such a degree that reading them too many times has damaged his mind in ways he is not entirely aware of. He lives alone on an ice floe far north of the main continent, inside a tiny outpost, working on a puzzle involving a Dwemer lock that he believes contains something of profound importance. He is brilliant, eccentric, and increasingly disconnected from a world he no longer visits. When he is eventually used as a vessel for a Daedric ritual and disintegrates into golden dust, the moment is quiet and strange. A man who asked the universe's largest questions dissolved at the exact moment he was no longer needed to ask them. The girl in the inn who learned to kill. Aventus Aretino, the boy who initiates the Dark Brotherhood questline by performing the Black Sacrament in an orphanage-adjacent house in Windhelm, is asking for the death of Grelad the Kind, the miserable old woman who runs Riften's Honor Hall orphanage. Grelad is genuinely cruel, withholding food and hope from children in her care with relish, and the orphans living under her watch are visibly afraid of her. The fact that a child learned how to perform a ritual blood sacrifice rather than endure another day under her supervision says everything about what that orphanage had become. When Grelad is killed, whether by the Dragonborn or simply as an environmental event the player witnesses, the children respond with open relief and celebration, which is either deeply satisfying or deeply uncomfortable, depending on how long you spend thinking about it. The wandering lunatic who isn't lying, the madwoman who wanders certain roads in Skyrim will occasionally appear and speak to the Dragonborn in fragments, disconnected prophecies, dream logic declarations, observations that seem to almost mean something. She is dismissible as atmospheric detail, a small piece of world texture, but her dialogue, assembled, touches on events that either have happened or will happen during the main quest in ways that are too specific to be coincidence. Whether she is genuinely prophetically gifted, traumatized into accidental insight, or simply placed by Bethesda as a way to distribute ambient lore in a human container is unclear. The game does not resolve this. She wanders off, and whatever she was carrying with her continues to wander too. The harper of a fallen house, Lisette performs at the Winking Skeever in Solitude, and she is professional and pleasant in the way of someone who has understood that being agreeable is the most reliable way to maintain employment in an inn full of soldiers, merchants, and travelers passing through the Empire's capital city. She is a bard in a city that prizes performance, and she performs not just musically but socially. She navigates the extremely complex politics of a city under wartime stress by simply never picking a side and always having a song ready. What she thinks about any of it, she keeps entirely to herself. In a city that contains the Imperial headquarters, the Thalmor embassy, and a Jarl still grieving her murdered husband, being a bard who knows how to be quietly invisible is probably the most sophisticated survival skill available. The man on the road with nothing left. Benor is a warrior in Morthal who can be challenged to a fistfight and who, if defeated, becomes available as a follower. His story, gathered in fragments, involves a degree of loss and drift that makes him one of those peripheral characters who feels like they fell out of a more complete backstory. He is tough, not particularly, introspective, and willing to follow the Dragonborn with the straightforward loyalty of someone who has no particular reason to be anywhere else. There is something about the availability of his loyalty, how easily he hands it over to a stranger who hit him hard enough. That suggests a man who gave up asking where he was going and decided the destination was less important than having a direction at all. The Chicken Necromancer. In the unmarked wilderness southeast of Riften, between Gaiamon's Hall and Honeystrand Cave, there is a man in necromancer robes doing something that no in-game text ever explains. He is raising dead chickens, not soldiers, not guards, chickens. His collection of reanimated poultry is, as far as the game communicates, entirely the product of personal choice. No cult, no agenda, no explanation. When approached, he summons his undead flock to defend himself and attacks. He dies as mysteriously as he lived, leaving behind only his robes, some scattered, ingredients, and the profound question of what sequence of events leads a person with apparent magical skill to devote their practice to poultry resurrection. He is possibly the most completely inexplicable person in all of Skyrim, and the game is entirely comfortable with this. The silver-voiced liar. Mike the Liar is a recurring character across the Elder Scrolls series. A Khajiit wanderer who appears in random locations on Skyrim's roads and offers dialogue that bounces between apparent nonsense, fourth-wall breaking meta-commentary, and occasional fragments of genuine lore. He has been present in Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, either as the same individual or as a lineage of Khajiit who share the name and the peculiar conversational style. His dialogue in Skyrim references things that have changed between games, the absence of spears, the reduction of certain spell schools, as if he is commenting on game mechanics rather than the world. Whether this is meant to canonize the metatextual dimension of his commentary or is simply Bethesda's winking acknowledgement that he has been a running joke for years has never been clarified. Mike the Liar, appropriately, has never confirmed it either way. The Sleeping Scholar. Finis Gestor, one of the conjuration trainers at the College of Winterhold, is involved in a radiant quest involving lost soul gems, and he is notable primarily for a line he delivers in one of the college's ambient conversations. A brief, exhausted confession that he sometimes wishes he had become a scribe instead of a mage, because scribes do not accidentally summon Atronachs in their sleep. This line is delivered with the flat affect of a man who is describing something that has actually happened to him more than once, and who has reached the precise stage of accumulated misfortune where it no longer even generates emotional response. He says it, and then the conversation continues, and the detail of a man being attacked by his own subconscious magical discharge while sleeping simply exists in the world of the college as one more unremarkable fact. The quest that was never given. In Nazulbur, the Orc stronghold in Eastmarch, a blacksmith named Dushnamub, the chief's son, can be found with a full set of dialogue about his distrust of his aunts and their relationship with his father. Nearby, buried in Skyrim's game files, is a fully voiced NPC named Uglaz, who was apparently intended to be the subject of a quest in which the Dragonborn would help the Chief Mohulak find a wife. Uglaz has a complete suite of dialogue, and the stronghold's inhabitants have unique lines referring to her arrival. The quest was apparently cut during development, leaving Uglaz in the files like a letter that was never sent, and the inhabitants of Nazulbur making references to a person who, in the version of the world that shipped, never came. The ghost of a question. The ancient traveler's skull, found a wayward pass in the mountains, is connected to a cut NPC called the Spirit of the Ancient Traveler. A ghost that was apparently intended to appear at this location, headless, in connection with a quest that also never made it into the final game. The skull exists. The spirit does not. Someone at Bethesda designed a ghost, wrote the bones of a quest, placed its physical component in the world, and then the whole thing was left incomplete. The skull sits on the pass, and the ghost wanders whatever non-existence game development cuts leave their subjects in, and the player can pick up the skull and carry it around Skyrim without any in-game system ever acknowledging that they are holding a conversation that nobody remembered to finish. The farmer who was right, Laureus, The farmer near whose property Cicero's wagon breaks down is suspicious of the jester from the first moment and does not want to help him. The Dragonborn can talk him into helping or report Cicero to the nearby guard. If you report Cicero, Laureus thanks you warmly. If you help Cicero, a guard is later found dead near Laureus's farm, with a note from Cicero thanking the Dragonborn for their assistance and indicating what became of the person who tried to refuse. Laureus was right. He was a farmer with good instincts about a man carrying a coffin and singing to himself at the roadside, and the game quietly vindicates those instincts while never explicitly making this a moral choice. The Dragonborn helps a serial killer transport his religious cargo. This is simply one of the things that happened on the road to Whiterun. The headmaster of a dying tradition, Viamo, the headmaster of Solitude's Bard's College, runs an institution that is one of the last preservations of a specifically Nordic cultural practice, the keeping and performance of history in the form of song and story. The Bard's College questline involves recovering and reconstructing the Poetic Edda of King Olaf, a historical text that has been partially destroyed, and the choice the Dragonborn faces at the end of it involves how much creative liberty is acceptable in the reconstruction of historical truth. Viamo wants the document completed and will accept interpolations if necessary. The philosophical question of whether a reconstructed history that serves the present is better or worse than an incomplete history that serves accuracy is left genuinely open. Viamo's enthusiasm for the answer that allows the festival of Burning King Olaf to proceed is very human and very much in the tradition of every institution that has ever had to choose between preservation and usefulness. The woman in the ice, in the throat of the world, at the time wound, where the Elder Scroll must be read, the Dragonborn witnesses a vision of the ancient past, specifically the moment when Alduin was first defeated by Hakon One-Eye, Gormlith Golden Hilt, and Feldir the Old. Gormlith is a woman, a detail that is easy to miss in the brief, chaotic vision, but is consistent with what the game establishes about Nordic history, where the greatest heroes were not limited by gender. She is the most aggressive of the three, urging the use of the Dragonren shout even when Hakon is uncertain, and she dies in the battle. Her role in saving the world from Alduin the first time is one of those facts that the game presents without emphasis, as a natural part of a world in which the distinction mattered less to the Nords of the ancient past than it does to some of their descendants in the present. The witness who never spoke. In Helgen, the village burned by Alduin at the opening of the game. The garrison of soldiers, villagers, and unfortunate prisoners that serves as the Dragonborn's introduction to Skyrim's world is a collection of people with lives that are about to end without their being able to do anything about it. Among them are soldiers who have served for years, a prisoner being escorted to execution for horse theft, a Stormcloak rebel who spends his last moments with more dignity than anyone trying to execute him can manage, and a small boy hiding under a table who, if you have a moment in the chaos, is just barely visible in a corner of the keep. None of them will appear in another game. None of them will be remembered as historical figures. The village is ash within the first 15 minutes of play, and the ordinary lives it contained are simply gone. The Dragon Crisis begins not as a story about magic and destiny, but as a building that is on fire with ordinary people in it. The man who watches the moons. Rhysard is the leader of one of the Khajiit caravans that travels the roads between Skyrim's major cities, and his caravan is one of the few places in the game where players can encounter Khajiit, not as enemies, but as traders, philosophers, and people with opinions about the province they are not entirely welcome in. Khajiit caravans are prohibited from entering the cities, kept outside the gates due to a combination of cultural suspicion and practical concerns about smuggling. Restful navigates this with a pragmatism that reads as quietly dignified. He does not argue about it. He simply trades from outside and observes Skyrim through the lens of someone who has learned that watching from the edges often gives you a clearer view than standing in the middle. His dialogue about the stars, about Khajiit cosmology, and about the relationship between the moons and his people's nature is some of the most quietly beautiful ambient lore in the game. The old man in the house by the mountain. Rorikstead is a small farming settlement in the Whiterun tundra, and it is remarkable primarily for an agricultural achievement that should not be possible. The crops grow well, year after year, despite the harsh climate and the apparent lack of any obvious magical assistance. A farmer named Lemkill is too miserable to be helpful on the subject, and the local innkeeper Mralki runs his establishment with the incurious acceptance of someone who stopped asking questions about their community's unusual good fortune years ago. What makes this interesting is a cluster of details that don't quite add up. An NPC who mentions giving children to someone, old references to someone named Rorik and a pact, and the general prosperity of a place that logically shouldn't thrive. Assembling these fragments carefully, some players have theorized that Rorikstead's prosperity could be connected to a Daedric arrangement of some kind. Though the game never names a Daedra, never confirms a deal, and never gives a quest that resolves it, it remains one of Skyrim's most persistently unsettling unmarked details, a pastoral scene with something quietly wrong underneath it that the world simply keeps growing around. The smith at the edge of the world, Glover Mallory, the blacksmith of Ravenrock on Solstheim, is one of those peripheral characters in the Dragonborn DLC who contains a complete life history in fragments. He left the Thieves Guild years ago and moved to the remote ash-covered island of Solstheim, ostensibly to start fresh. He works his forge with the quiet determination of someone who made a decision and intends to live with it. What most players never discover, unless they have found Sapphire in Riften and delivered her a letter, is that he is her father, that he has been trying to find her for years, and that he does not know if she is alive. The letter he wrote to her, which the Dragonborn can carry across the sea, is the kind of act that costs the game nothing mechanically and means everything to both characters if the player chooses to pursue it. The Dunmer, without a home. Neloth is an ancient and deeply self-absorbed Dunmer mage who operates his research tower, Tel Mithrin, on Solstheim, with the cheerful contempt of someone who has lived long enough to consider everyone else's concerns essentially temporary. He appears across multiple quest lines in the Dragonborn DLC, often as someone whose assistance is required, but who makes the experience of receiving that assistance as galling as possible. He lost his previous steward to unfortunate experimental circumstances, a detail he notes with the mild regret of someone remarking on a broken piece of equipment. He is brilliant, relentlessly self-focused, and on occasion, genuinely funny in the way of someone so far past caring about social performance that they have accidentally become entertaining. He is also one of the few mages in the game who has clearly kept growing over centuries in the way that very long-lived people can, when they refuse to stop being interested in the world. The Pilgrim's Regret. Erender, the priest who can become a follower after the Waking Nightmare questline in Dawnstar, carries more visible guilt than almost any other follower in the game. He was once a worshipper of Vermina, who participated in events he would rather not describe in full, and his conversion to the worship of Mara is the sincere attempt of someone who woke up and did not like what the waking showed him, He is gentle, thoughtful, and mildly self-deprecating in the way of people who have not yet forgiven themselves for something old. A Daedric artifact called the Skull of Corruption, which is the focus of his questline, can be destroyed rather than kept, and this is perhaps the most character-consistent thing the player can do with it, giving a man who is trying to leave something behind the opportunity to actually see it burn. The Blacksmith's Confession. Alvor, the blacksmith in Riverwood, is one of the first friendly faces the Dragonborn encounters if they escape from Helgen through Hadvar. He is warm, practical, and immediately helpful in the way of people who grew up in small communities and learned early that helping travelers is simply what decent people do. What is less immediately apparent is that Alvar is quietly caught between loyalty to the Empire and love for his community. His wife's family has Stormcloak sympathies, and the arrival of a Helgen survivor with a story about dragons is the kind of event that makes political allegiances feel very small and very far away. He gives the Dragonborn a starter kit of crafting materials and asks for nothing. His hospitality is the first truly uncomplicated act of kindness in the game, and it establishes a baseline of ordinary human decency against which everything that follows will be measured. The Scholar of the Greybeard's Mountain, High Hrothgar, holds one quiet detail that most players completely overlook. In the eastern wing of the monastery, there is a room containing a large library. Hundreds of books on theology, history, magic, and the Thu'um, accumulated over centuries by monks who chose silence as their highest virtue. These books are never referenced in any quest, serve no mechanical purpose, and can be read in their entirety without receiving any reward for doing so. They are there because the Greybeards, whatever else they are people who think, and thinking people accumulate texts. The library is a portrait of an interior life that the game has no particular reason to show you. Placed quietly in a room off a hallway in a monastery, most players rush through on their way to the mountain's peak. The warrior who waits for the end. The Ebony Warrior is an encounter that becomes available only when the Dragonborn reaches level 80, the highest threshold for any optional quest trigger in the game. He is a Red Guard fighter of extraordinary skill who approaches the Dragonborn in a city and issues a challenge. Meet him at his camp for one final battle to the death. He explains calmly that he has killed every enemy worth killing and faced every danger worth facing, and what he is looking for now is someone capable of sending him to Sovngarde. He wants to die fighting the best opponent available. The Ebony Warrior is the game's statement about what it means to be the Dragonborn. That at a certain level of power, the only person left to challenge you is someone who is seeking not victory but a worthy ending. He is the game looking at the player and asking what comes after you have won everything. The miner with a quiet investment. Gesture Rockbreaker is a miner who works in Dawnstar's Quicksilver mine, and his story is so deeply unimportant to the main narrative of Skyrim that it serves as a perfect illustration of how the game fills its world. He works, he sleeps, he worries about the nightmares. He has modest opinions about the mine's management and modest ambitions about his own future. He is not connected to any quest line that matters. He's simply there, adding one more person to the roster of Dawnstar's troubled community, making the town feel inhabited rather than staged. Every gesture Rockbreaker in Skyrim, every unnamed person doing unremarkable things in difficult circumstances, is the game's insistence that the world exists even when you are not looking at it. The trader who keeps moving, Rhysard's caravan, introduced earlier, operates in a state of perpetual motion between the cities of Skyrim's interior, And the Khajiit members of that caravan are some of the most philosophically interesting peripheral NPCs in the game. Khajiit cosmology is built around the moons, Massa and Secunda, and the phase of the moons at a Khajiit's birth determines their physical form. The game's Khajiit are all in the form called Cathay, bipedal, and relatively human in dimension, because that is the birth form associated with a particular lunar configuration. But Resard and his fellow travelers are aware of a wider spectrum of what their people can be, and their dialogue occasionally touches on forms of Khajiit that exist beyond what Skyrim's roads have room for. They are, in this sense, representatives of a people whose full reality has been compressed into a manageable game asset. The soldier who talks too much. Hadvar, the Imperial soldier who helps the Dragonborn escape Helgen, is one of two possible guides through the tutorial dungeon, the other being Ralof, the Stormcloak rebel. The choice between them is mechanically insignificant but thematically important. Hadvar is practical, professionally loyal to the Empire, and somewhat naive about the political reality his empire is operating within. He talks throughout the dungeon with the chatty relief of someone glad to have company during a catastrophe, and his commentary on the various horrors encountered is the first indication that Skyrim's world is going to treat ordinary human beings navigating extraordinary events as worth paying attention to. Hadvar later turns up in Riverwood at his uncle Alvor's house, recovered from the trauma of Helgen with the bounce-back resilience of someone who has filed the experience under extremely bad day and moved on. The rebel who loves his city, Ralof, the Stormcloak counterpart to Arch Hadvar, accompanies the Dragonborn through Helgen on the Stormcloak path and provides the emotional case for the rebellion through his personal investment in it, rather than its ideology. He talks about Skyrim as a place he loves, mentions specific towns and specific people, a sister in Riverwood, a shared history with certain landscapes, in a way that anchors the political conflict in personal stakes. He is not arguing for Stormcloak victory on principle, but on love. His sister Gerda, who runs a mill in Riverwood, will shelter him and the Dragonborn if they arrive there after the Helgen escape, and the family reunion is quietly moving. Ralof is the human face of a political cause that the game is careful to show has both. The steward who never chose a side, Proventus. Avanici's daughter Adrienne is connected to one of the game's quieter civic details. The War Maiden's smith, positioned at the very gate of Whiterun, is one of the first places the Dragonborn can buy or sell equipment. But the positioning is also symbolic. Adrienne stands at the threshold between the city and the road, which is exactly where she exists politically. Her father urges restraint. Her husband has sympathies that run in one direction. The city she lives in is trying to stay neutral. She runs her forge, she processes her orders, and she embodies the practical reality of most people in wartime. They are not choosing sides so much as choosing to keep their work alive. The War Maiden's sign above her door is more accurate than it knows. She is, in fact, always between. The father at the wrong gate. Torvar is a companion in Jorvaska, who is memorable primarily for being cheerfully, persistently bad at the things companions are supposed to be good at. He drinks too much, his fighting skills are underwhelming, and he acknowledges both with a disarming lack of defensiveness. He joined the companions because he had nowhere else to go, and because the idea of belonging to something seemed appealing when he had nothing. His incompetence is not played for tragedy. He seems genuinely comfortable with it, but it raises the question of how many people who end up in heroic institutions are there not because they are exceptional, but because the door was open and they had no better door. Not every member of the world's most famous warrior guild is Isgramor. Some of them are Torvar, and the guild is honest enough not to pretend otherwise. The woman who sold the same story. Twice. Ingjard is a member of the Dawn Guard and one of the available followers from that faction, and she is notable primarily for a quality she shares with many of the Dawn Guard's rank and file: a complete clarity of purpose. She joined because she believes vampires are a genuine threat. She fights because she is good at it. She has no hidden agenda, no secondary loyalty, no complicated backstory designed to create a plot twist. She is exactly what she says she is. In a game full of characters, concealing things, Ingjard is mildly startling in her straightforwardness. A reminder that most people who end up in dangerous organizations do so because they actually believe in what that organization does, not because they are secretly working against it. The Watchman of the Pale. Vigilance, the war dog that can be purchased from a handler outside Markarth, is technically an NPC. He is also the most loyal and least complicated relationship in Skyrim. He will follow the Dragonborn into every dungeon, face every dragon, and die in defense of someone he decided to trust the moment they handed over a small amount of gold. His only requirement is presence. He asks nothing about politics, nothing about the Civil War, nothing about whether the person he is following is the Dragonborn or a particularly ambitious adventurer. He follows because following is what he does, and because the person he is following has kept him fed. The simplicity of this is not a limitation. In a game full of characters who want something from the protagonist, Vigilance's uncomplicated loyalty is, without question, the most purely restful thing in all of Skyrim. The Argonian at the docks. Gulam I is a Thieves' Guild fence who operates out of the East Empire Company warehouse in Solitude, maintaining a cover identity as a legitimate merchant representative. He is nervous, double-dealing, and entirely motivated by self-preservation, a character whose combination of cowardice and commercial ambition has landed him in the uncomfortable middle position of being useful to too many people with conflicting interests. His questline involves tracking him through the Solitude docks and underground caverns, during which he makes several attempts to buy his way out of accountability before finally providing the information the guild needs. He is not a villain in any grand sense. He is someone who has been consistently choosing the path of least resistance for long enough that he has no path left. That does not involve other people's problems. The Jarl's daughters. Idgrod Ravencrone, the Jarl of Morthal, is unusual among Skyrim's rulers in that her authority is built partly on a reputation for prophetic vision. She speaks in ellipses and indirections, seeming to know things before they happen. Her daughters, one of whom, Idgrod the Younger, shows early signs of the same prophetic sensitivity, represent the generational inheritance of something that is either a gift, a curse, or both. Morthal is, of all Skyrim's hold capitals, the most deeply unsettling. A town built on a bog, perpetually foggy, haunted by nightmares, and presided over by a woman who seems to be watching a slightly different version of reality than everyone around her. Idgrod's children will either carry on something genuinely important or be burdened by the expectation of an ability they cannot control. The game does not say which. In Morthal, nothing is that clear. The last standing blade. Esbern has a quality that is almost entirely specific to him among Skyrim's NPCs. He is someone who was right about something catastrophic, knew he was right, and spent years being dismissed and eventually hunted for it. he retreated into the depths of Riften's Ratway, not because he gave up, but because survival was the only way to still be available when the Dragonborn finally came. His rooms in the Ratway are covered in papers, calculations, timelines, the accumulated evidence of a man who has been doing the slow, unglamorous work of being correct in a world that finds correct people inconvenient. When the Dragonborn finds him and he realizes that the dragon crisis has indeed started, his response is not triumph but a kind of weary relief. Being right for a long time is exhausting, especially when being right meant being afraid. The man beneath the ice. Dawnstar's prison, which is mentioned in passing by several characters, is a detail the game references without ever fully developing. One more fragment of a city trying to maintain civic order while its population cannot sleep and its leadership is struggling to keep a lid on escalating supernatural problems. The prison holds people, presumably for ordinary crimes, while extraordinary events unfold around it. The guards who staff it are subject to the same nightmares as everyone else. The prisoners are presumably suffering through the same terrorized sleep. It is, in its way, a perfect image of what it is like to try to maintain normal institutional functions when the normal has already stopped working. The prison keeps operating, the cells stay locked, the nightmares keep coming, everyone manages. The fisherman and the sea. Stag Salt Plank is a sailor who can be found in the docks area near Windhelm, and his connection to the main game is peripheral but characterful. He is involved in the quest involving the theft of the East Empire Company shipping manifest, a contract that the Thieves Guild uses to extract advantage from Solitude's mercantile infrastructure. He is rough, weather-worn, and treats information as something to be sold rather than shared. But the coastal world he represents, the sea trade that runs between Skyrim's hold cities and the wider world beyond its borders, is one of the least explored dimensions of the province's economy, and characters like Stig are the glimpse that suggests Skyrim is not a closed world, but a peninsula connected by water to a much larger history. The champion of Dibella. The priestesses of Dibella in Markarth operate from the Temple of Dibella, a quiet and slightly unusual institution in a city better known for Dwemer ruins and political violence. The head priestess, Hamal, guards the temple's inner sanctum with firm purpose. The Sibyl of Dibella, a young girl chosen prophetically to embody the goddess's blessing, is kept in sacred seclusion there. The Dragonborn's quest line here involves finding a new Sibyl after the previous one has died, traveling to a small village outside Markarth and bringing the chosen child to the temple. The quest line is quiet and personal, about the obligations of sacred traditions and the difficulty of taking a child away from her family for institutional purposes, even loving institutional purposes. The temple represents something rarely explored in Skyrim's darker narrative landscape. Genuine, uncomplicated devotion to something benevolent. The mage who never came back. Enthir, the College of Winterhold's unofficial black market contact, is a Bosmer who operates with a smooth, professional demeanor that suggests he has thought carefully about the art of having good relationships with everyone while making specific and binding commitments to none. He sells items that the college officially frowns upon and serves as the translator for Gallus's journal in the Thieves Guild questline, a role that positions him as the exact kind of person who has found a niche in the gap between what institutions officially allow and what they practically require. He is also, in a small way, responsible for the misfortune of Onmund, the Nord student whose family heirloom Enthir, acquired as payment for helping fund Onmund's tuition. He is not malicious. He simply treats obligation as a commercial category rather than a personal one. The witch who named the wind, Olava the Feeble, revisited here with more attention than her first mention, has a character trait that makes her more interesting than her begging surface suggests. She lives in Whiterun's market district, visible to everyone, interacting with the ordinary social traffic of the city every day, and in a city that contains a Jarl, a court wizard, a legendary blacksmith, and a member of an ancient and secret order pretending to be an innkeeper. Olava is the one who can tell you something true about where you are going. The ability to see is not always the ability to act, and she has clearly decided that the appropriate use of her gift is to sit quietly, observe, and occasionally offer a word to someone who has earned the right to hear it. She asks nothing in return. She simply tells you what she knows. The sleeping town, beneath the volcano. Helgen itself deserves one final fact, separate from the chaos of its opening. Before the dragon attack, Helgen was a functioning imperial garrison town, small, cold, and unremarkable, but full of people going about the specific business of being alive in a militarized border community. Children played in the streets, guards made rounds, a blacksmith worked a forge. The execution of Ulfric Stormcloak was meant to be a significant political event, and the citizens gathered to watch it with the particular mixture of civic duty and morbid curiosity that characterizes public spectacles everywhere and in every era. Alduin's arrival ended all of this in approximately 10 minutes. The town that had hosted generations of ordinary Nordic life was a ruin before the smoke cleared. Helgen exists now only as a dungeon and a memory, and the people who lived their entire lives inside its walls are simply not there anymore.